Hello, everyone. Now, how often have you looked at someone who's been through a tough, stressful, or traumatic time and actually seen the effects this has had on them? Sometimes it's obvious. Excessive weight gain or weight loss, or many times we don't see how it has affected them because an eating disorder is actually easy to hide for most people. When we're in a state of turmoil, our relationship with food is one of the first things to suffer, right? Some of us turn to food to comfort or distract us, and others actually can't stand the sight of it. So today on Syntropy, we're talking emotional eating. Helping us answer some burning questions around this rather sensitive topic are registered dietitian Kelly Gruber and a regular on our podcast series, Paula Quinsee, who is a life and relationship coach. Ladies, hello and welcome.
Hello.
Hi, and thank you for having us.
Well, this is such an important topic because, many of us kind of joke about, I'm just comfort eating today. Oh, I feel so down. I think I'm going to treat myself to a whole slab or a whole piece of cake because I just feel that way. And we all have those moments, right, of craving or binging on our favorite foods. But how do we actually differentiate between that and emotional eating? And Kelly, I think you can take this one for us first.
Sure. So there is actually quite a big difference between the two. So an easy way to establish the difference would be physical hunger is a physiological need to eat. So for example, your tummy might grumble. It takes time to build up that hunger. So it's not something that you need immediately. Over time, a couple of hours, you start to feel hungry. You go and have a meal, have a snack. And a big difference between that and emotional eating is that what you choose, it's not something specific. So you might feel hungry and decide, should I have a salad? Should I have a wrap? And you have that food, you feel satisfied, and your hunger is gone. When it comes to emotional eating, often the food choice is very specific. So you might crave a chocolate or you might want a packet of chips. So it's a very specific craving. The hunger comes on very quickly. So it comes on immediately. You immediately want that chocolate or you immediately want that food item. So that's a big difference between the two. Physiological hunger takes time. Emotional hunger is immediate. You want to satisfy that need right now. So that is a big difference between the two. Often with emotional eating, the hunger is not satisfied. So you've had the chocolate, you might get a little bit of a happiness for a couple of minutes, but then you're still hungry. You still haven't satisfied that craving. So you might eat more, overeat, carry on eating more chocolate, or finish the bag of chips. And even after that, you still might feel hungry.
Wow. Okay. So I'm that kind of person, right? I eat when I'm happy. I eat when I'm sad. I eat when I'm depressed. I eat when I'm stressed. I eat all the time. Food is my comfort. So is that considered emotional eating, or do I just like food? Am I just a greedy guts?
So anytime that you use food as a crutch or as a coping mechanism for food, whether it's a happy emotion or whether it's a sad emotion, you're still using the food as a coping mechanism. So often when we think of emotional eating, we're thinking it's something negative like sadness or loneliness or boredom, but it can actually also be related to happiness. It can be a happy emotion that causes you to emotionally eat. So an example of that would be a social situation. So think of a party. You might overeat or overindulge at a party, but that's coming from a happy emotion.
There's a party in my head all the time then. That's what's happening here.
I thought it was tequila, not food.
Yes, well, that too. But funny enough, no, it's food. I actually think of and those Lindo balls, those are my kryptonite, especially the new mango flavor. But I'm not going to talk about that now. That's advertising. Okay, but Paula, is it necessarily that there has to be a trigger, that there has to be a life event that kind of brings up something like emotional eating? Or could it be something I'm sitting with, for example, from childhood, something I've carried with me? Or is it, for example, I just had a bad day at the office. I've had a fight with my husband. My children have irritated me, that this has now led to something happening in my mind and my body.
It can definitely be a combination of both. So childhood trauma can cause us to be triggered with what's happening in the present state. So in other words, everyday life stresses. And if we haven't dealt with that trauma or those suppressed emotions, we can use eating as a way of self-soothing or suppressing the emotions that we're feeling. And then everyday life stresses, life is stressful, it's busy, it's all of those things. And as Kelly mentioned, loneliness, anger, frustration, pain, all of those kind of things can be triggers for us to actually take on emotional eating. But as she said, it can also be good emotions. For example, we use food as a way to celebrate, right?
Yeah.
So breaking fast, weddings, birthdays, even funerals.
It's all about the food. It's all about the
food.
food. Everything, every event is about the food. So, and that was my next question, is why people actually turn to food in particular when it comes to emotional eating. Why is it food? Is it that they already have a bad or an unhealthy relationship with food? I think I'd like both of you to answer, but Paula, you're the relationship coach and, when it comes to food and our relationships.
Yeah, I think, some people may not realize that they have this kind of relationship with food because of the stories that we tell ourselves to justify our actions and our behavior. So as you mentioned earlier, I'm having a bad day, so therefore I'm going to treat myself and I'm just going to have takeouts tonight. But when you don't actually keep track of and realize how often you are turning to food as a coping mechanism or a crutch, before you know it, we're far down that line, and it can have a knock-on effect from a health point of view in terms of the physical health, and can lead to things like diabetes and strokes and heart attacks and those kind of things. And I think it's more around understanding what's the source or the trigger of that is creating this relationship that you're having with food.
All right. And Kelly, your take on that one about why it's actually food. Why isn't somebody turning to, I don't know, for example, tequila some people do. Is that this, some people turn to alcohol, but that's alcoholism and that is a sort of different response to their stress as well. But when it comes specifically to food, and why necessarily unhealthy food? Like you're talking about, they're not turning to carrot sticks, when they're stressed.
So food plays such an important part of our lives. If you think about it from a cultural perspective, from a social perspective, so food is so big in our lives that is why a lot of people turn to food, because it's a comfort, it's something we're familiar with, it's something that's easily accessible, so it's around, and it's also socially acceptable. So it's easier to turn to food as a coping mechanism compared to smoking or alcohol. So that is why food is often the crutch that people go towards, because it's comfortable, it's accessible, it's available, and it's something that's we're familiar with from a comfort point of view.
And it's always around. You're always going to have something around you. There's always that kind of, but unhealthy food, is it necessarily emotional eating? Why is it that people go to unhealthy food? Like we say, they're not reaching for celery stick and hummus, So
most of the time that can be a hormone response. So particularly stress, for example, you have a high intake of, or high cortisol hormone, which is your stress hormone, and that interferes with your appetite hormones. So often it's very rare that you're going to crave something unhealthy. In that stress response or in that physiological response, you tend to go for high fatty foods, high salty foods, and sugary foods, because those are comforting foods. And this can come back from childhood as well, as Paula mentioned, that in our childhood we have been taught to use food as a comfort. So maybe you had a good school report and you went for an ice cream, or a party is another example.
There's reward,
reward with sweets, and so we have developed that relationship, or we've developed that association with certain foods are comforting to us. It can also be culture specific. So if you think of maybe in our country, mealie pap or macaroni cheese, those are some comfort foods for some people. But if you look at a company like Japan, miso soup might be a comfort food for them.
If you have an Indian mother, biryani for breakfast, you get your day off to a wonderful start, hey Paula?
Absolutely. And, linking on to what Kelly was saying, when we reward ourselves with food, it actually, the dopamine, it lights up the area in our brain, and dopamine kicks in there, which is the reward system in our brains. So every time we turn to comfort food, it keeps rewarding us and it keeps lighting that up in our brains. And so, which is why it becomes a repetitive behavior as well.
Almost, yeah. Okay. So, you answered the question which was my next one about hormones. And surely, and we know when you're stressed, there's different hormones that are released, and that's the need for it. But Kelly, what are your clients or patients telling you? What do they tell you about if you are dealing with emotional eaters? And I'm sure that you deal with some, you have dealt with quite a few. What are they feeling from the time this feeling starts? And from the time then they go through this bout of eating, and I'm sure the feeling afterward is not so great as well.
No, definitely not. So, from my experience in private practice, a lot of the time the patients don't come to us for emotional eating. They come
Or do they even know that they're emotional eating?
So often they are not aware of it. So they come for just to be healthy or to lose weight. And often it only comes up during the consultation. So once we are exploring their eating habits with them, chatting to them a little bit more, getting to know them, often that is the time when the disordered eating comes up in the consultation. So a lot of the time they are not aware of it. And so once we are discovering with them how they feel, often you're eating because you're feeling unhappy, but once you've eaten that item, you feel even worse.
Yeah.
So you feel guilty, you feel ashamed.
Self-loathing, I would imagine, as well, especially
Yes.
for those who are really, sort of obsessed with their eating as well.
Yeah, they feel embarrassed, and then this whole vicious cycle starts again. So they're eating because they're unhappy, then they get unhappy because of what they've eaten, and you get stuck in this rat of this vicious cycle.
Wow, that sounds like, I don't even know, Paula, it just sounds like a horrible place to be.
It absolutely is, because, it plays on your mental health in terms of not feeling good about yourself.
Yeah.
So, particularly women, it plays a lot on them because we are body conscious already as women, you know, not only from a society point of view in terms of the glossy magazines and what the perfect body should look like.
Well, your own aunties will tell you, right?
Exactly. So there's
your mother-in-law will tell you.
Yeah, so there's the stigma around what unhealthy looks like, and it's, being overweight or being out of shape or not looking like what's in the glossy magazines, which is totally unrealistic because we know they're photoshopped, right?
Absolutely.
So there's that in terms of being labeled, and then, how people look at us. So if we are slightly overweight, for example, or curvy, and, we go out in public and people look at us, it kind of reinforces that shame that we have about ourselves and that guilt. And then also just in terms of your own relationship. So, for example, with your partner, feeling unattractive to your partner, especially on a physical level, and that affects your sexual relationship as well in your relationship with your partner. So it does have a knock-on effect. And it's really getting to understand, as Kitty was saying, what's underneath that's contributed to you now turning towards food as a coping mechanism to self-soothe or suppress the negative emotions that you are trying to avoid feeling and processing. And then how do you go on that journey, which is a parallel journey, dealing with the emotions and the mental and emotional side of it, and then the eating side of it in terms of making healthier eating choices.
And I want to talk solutions in just a moment, because it's obviously a multi-pronged solution. It's not just a matter of only seeing someone like Kelly and getting a good eating plan. There's more. But Kelly, is emotional eating something that can only just be a temporary phase? Say, for example, I'm just going through a bad patch at work, or and it's something that it might last a few days, or it might last a couple of weeks, and then it passes? Or is it often something that leads to a long-term problem?
So I think that would be very patient specific. So often it can be very temporary. So maybe you're having a bad month, or maybe you've got a big project at work that's stressing you out, and that particular month you're emotionally eating a lot more. If you get your emotions and your feelings under control, it can absolutely go away. But often it becomes a habit. So once you start using food as a coping mechanism, it becomes easy, and it becomes more of a habit. And if it's happening more frequently, then obviously that can lead to long-term emotional eating, and it can also lead to like a more serious condition. Obviously, on the extreme side of the spectrum, things like anorexia, bulimic, binging disorder. So it can start off as something innocent and short-term, but it can develop into something long-term. But with that being said, it is very normal for all of us to have a little bit of emotional eating.
Yeah.
You had a bad day, you want to have a chocolate, that's okay.
Yeah.
But when it becomes every day or frequently, or when you're constantly turning to food to solve your feelings, that's when it becomes a problem.
And how, Paula, I know you want to add, how do we put a time frame to this? Like, when is this a problem? If you've been doing this for 6 months?
So, I think, there's also seasonal things. So we all know about winter eating, right?
Yes.
Comfort food because it's cold out there. And,
and your body needs it, right? Because you need to stay warm. You need to add, like, how you add wood to the fire. That's what happens, right? Yeah.
So I think, it's taking into account where you're at in your life and your journey. And as Kitty was saying, has it become a habit, or is it just a phase that you're going through? And are you aware and conscious of how long that phase is? So we all know in winter we like to indulge because it's cold out there, and it's nice to have comforting food like curries and soups and stuff like that. But then the minute spring starts coming, everybody wants to get their summer bodies, right? Because they're going on holiday in Durban or wherever, and they want to go to the beach. So we have to, start working out. But when it starts becoming habitual, I think, and it starts having an effect on your own self-esteem and self-worth and your confidence with your relationship with your body, first of all, and yourself, and then relationships with others. I think that's when you need to start doing something about it in terms of digging deeper and then potentially getting professional help, whether it's seeing a dietitian and or, coach, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, to help you unpack what's underneath there.
And let's talk about that now, because obviously, Kelly, you would have, like you say, discovered at some point somebody who comes to you and they're putting on weight, they're losing weight, they're putting on weight, it doesn't seem to be shifting at all. You've identified that there's something that triggers the eating. It's not exactly eating alone. It's an emotional issue. How do you address that? How do you get to that point? And if you're comfortable to give us some examples of just how things have turned out with certain patients or clients, what it is you found, obviously without mentioning any names.
So in practice, we normally start, obviously we've had an initial assessment, we've discovered, okay, there is a bit of emotional eating going on. So my first point of call would be to give the patient a couple of tips and tricks and a couple of techniques that they can try at home to try and manage their own emotional eating themselves. In some cases, that's not enough and they need to be referred to a psychologist or even a medical doctor. So if depression, for example, is the trigger, they may need medical intervention to help deal with that trigger. But what I normally start with my patients is a food journal. So they start with like a food diary, and that is for them to pinpoint their triggers. So they would keep a record for me, tell me what time of day is it worse? Is it an afternoon binge? Is it maybe at the end of a very long day? So we're trying to pinpoint what is your trigger. So that's the first point of call in practice. Once we have established, okay, this is the trigger, we try and give them techniques on how to modify that, how to change that to be something positive. So for example, if afternoon binge eating is a problem for somebody, we would then say, okay, let's come up with something positive. Maybe 4 o'clock is your trigger time. Let's go for a walk at 4 o'clock or make yourself a cup of tea. So we try and come up with strategies that they can replace that behavior with if that is a trigger time of day. Other techniques could be to make sure that there's no trigger foods in the house. So if you know that chocolate is your weakness, don't have it in the house.
So no more Lindo balls in the fridge, just in case.
Or tequila.
That's okay. But, Kelly, because traditionally nutritionists or dietitians would go through, it would just be, okay, tell me what you eat in the day. Tell me this is your plan. And you get a plan and you go off. All these questions that you now say you ask someone, has that become standard practice when somebody comes to you to say, I'm battling with my weight, I'm battling to shift this in my body? Are these things now that the psychological aspect, has that become standard to ask now?
So absolutely. So I think as dietitians, we cannot ignore that aspect of food. So if we just chatted about what the person's eating without actually investigating why are they choosing those foods, why are they binging, what is happening on the other side, you're not going to get a successful weight loss journey if you haven't tackled the psychological aspect of eating.
Okay. All right. And Paula, for people who maybe don't have access to someone like Kelly or don't realize they need to be seeing someone like Kelly, who then obviously that would lead to them getting the psychological help they need. How would I know? At what point for me should it be setting in that, look, this is not normal now. This is not just you having that, once a month period craving, or just, before you having that certain person coming to stay at your house for a weekend and it's going to be stressful, and you kind of dig into, seize the first biscuit you find in your house. That it's not just those little things, that this is now something that is a problem.
I think the most important thing is starting with, first of all, about how do you feel about yourself? Are you comfortable with whatever your weight is or however the lifestyle that you're living? And generally people get to a point where the pain of staying where they are far outweighs the pain of changing. So they have to do something.
That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. Okay. So when we get to a point where we can't tolerate the pain of where we are anymore, that's when we really start doing something to shift and change the pain and take those steps. And it would be similar to what Kelly does, is, asking them detailed questions around their lifestyle, their life stresses, their coping mechanisms, their support structures, and all of those kind of things, to see where things are out of sync and where things are potentially contributing to how they've got to where they are at this point in time. And then helping them put a plan in place to shift them out of that. And so some of the recommendations and tools could be, we'll go and have a proper eating plan drawn up for you in terms of, checking whether you've got diabetes and all of those kind of things. So from a medical point of view.
Whether it's hormonal or whether it's emotional.
Absolutely. And then, accountability, because that's often where people fall off the bus, is when there's no accountability in place. So helping them put accountability in place. So first of all, what can they do to hold themselves accountable? So like Kelly mentioned, if they know when they're going to be triggered, what time of day, what steps do they put in place to counteract that? And then at the same time, holding them accountable by following up with them in terms of what have you achieved, what have you done, how have you coped, how have you managed, where are you falling off the bus, those kind of things. So really putting a support structure in place that it can be sustainable change over time, because it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. And the thing is, with lives being what they are, and I know we keep going back to COVID, and it does happen, but Kelly, have you seen a lot of this since COVID, since lockdown with the emotional eating? And I'm just curious, and I know people are long past talking about it, but it might be where it started for a lot of people. So and they're carrying on now in 2023.
So absolutely. So I think COVID, for a lot of people, it's caused quite a lot of stress. So obviously the stress, emotional eating. But
being at home.
Yes. So one of the biggest things I've seen in practice is the people that are working from home, there's access to the fridge 24/7. So there's a lot of this boredom eating, up and down to the fridge every time because you're at home, you're in your comfort space. There's also been an increase in online meetings. So a lot of people don't take a lunch break anymore. So there's this mindless eating of just eating
when you can
in front of your computer through meetings. So that's definitely contributing towards emotional eating.
And if people has it stuck, I mean, it stayed with them now, even though they're going back to the office, they can't shake these habits.
Definitely. And I, from my experience in practice, it's definitely worse on the days that the patients work from home.
Yeah.
Because you're comfortable, you're in your space, the fridge is there.
That's my problem. I need to go find a regular job now. I need to find a job in an office. Yeah, Paula, can I come to your office every day so I don't emotionally eat and you can bring me smoothies every morning?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay. So is there a particular personality type that might be more susceptible to emotional eating? Paula?
No, I think it can affect anybody, but I think it's more around the coping mechanisms that you put in place for yourself and how often you reach into these coping mechanisms. Some of it can be a period of time, but I think if you've got more of an addictive nature, then yes, you will become more addictive to emotional eating and that becomes a habit than just a phase that I'm going through.
And what about people who like to be in control of their bodies and like to be in control, or when they feel they're not in control of a certain situation in their life, it becomes about their bodies as well. And Kelly, with that, is it with something like, and we know there are things like intermittent fasting that people are doing now, which some say they get results, some say they don't. It's working, it's not working for other people, but putting yourself in a sort of situation like that where you say, okay, I'm only going to start eating now from 10 or 12 o'clock. I've stopped 6 o'clock the night before. Is something like that, can it be helpful or can it be more damaging to the situation?
So in terms of meal plans and meal techniques,
rigid things, rules.
So I would say yes and no. So in terms of a meal plan, it can help some people to feel more in control. So there's a structured eating plan. You know exactly what your snacks are. You know exactly what your meal times are. So for an emotional eater, some people need that. They need to know that if you're hungry at 9 o'clock, that's not a snack time. Wait for your snack.
I'm putting my hand up because I need that. I need to be told what to do. Or it's free for all.
So for some personalities, that really does help. It gives them structure. It tells them how to kind of space their day, and it can prevent emotional eating. When it comes to something like intermittent fasting, fasting itself can be a little bit dangerous in terms of blood glucose drops. So a low blood sugar can also be a trigger for emotional eating. So and also that mentality of I've eaten nothing the whole day, now I'm allowed to eat, I can eat everything in sight. So it can be dangerous for some people, but then again, for other people, it might help them to curb that daytime snacking or whatever it is. So I think when it comes to a meal plan and a meal type, there's no one size fit all. It depends on the patient's personality. It depends on what's going to work for them.
Are,
exactly.
All of those things.
So that's why I want to say yes and no. It can help some people, but it can also be detrimental. A meal plan or a diet plan can also create that sense of deprivation. You're now on an eating plan that's a diet. I hate the word diet because it feels like you're on a set plan.
It's very strict. It's very strict. Yeah.
And in some people, they might then turn to emotional eating because they now feel deprived that they're on a meal.
Because you hate your plan.
Yes.
You start to hate your plan. So that's something else now. Yes. I've been there.
Yeah.
Paula, you're nodding. I know you want to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I also hate the word diet because diet has a negative connotation attached to it. We feel like we are being deprived of and
sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. And then that creates a negative knock-on impact in terms of, I can't have this, I can't do this, I can't do that. And so then it it starts spiraling out of control. And then that's where yo-yo dieting comes in, because then people fall off the bus, because then it's, I'm just going to have this piece of cake. And then before you know it, you've had so much more. And then the whole guilt and shame thing comes again. And then I'll start my diet on Monday. And then we wait until Monday, and then we get stuck in the cycle, which can be bad for you from a mental health point of view, but also around, the physical side of it as well.
Well, ladies, that's why here on Syntropy, we actually use the word nourish instead of diet or even eating plan, because you're nourishing not just your body, you're nourishing your mind, you're nourishing your soul. Because like we've been talking about, emotional eating is about something that is going on in your mind and something that's going on with your emotions or moods or whatever it is. So nourish is a word I think that we need to start using more when it comes to, our eating and our eating habits. Just to look at solutions now and look at where we're going. But actually, before we get to solutions, another interesting point is about sometimes it's not just about what we are doing to ourselves in terms of food. What about if there is someone in our orbit, someone in a relationship who likes to feed us, knowing that, this is not something that we want to be healthier, we want to be different. And it can happen with somebody who's been like our mothers, for example. I mean, for example, I'm not saying all mothers are feeders, but they like to feed you. Have another spoon. No, but mom, I'm full. But come, I cooked this for you from the morning. Have another spoon of this, please. And they'll stand there and it's already like coming over your shoulder, Or even husbands are like, here's happy anniversary. Here's like 10 slabs of chocolate, that kind of thing. And it may not always be malicious or vindictive, but that being said, I think there was even a television series on feeders, people who are actually feeding people tubes of fat. So I'd like your take on that, where emotional eating is not just sitting with the person who's putting the food into their mouths. It's coming from outside.
Absolutely. And I see this sometimes with couples where the one person is, healthy mind, active lifestyle, healthy eating.
Or trying to be.
But then the other partner is the instigator. So, they eat healthily and then afterwards like, don't you feel like a chocolate?
Yeah.
Should I go to the shop quickly or the garage and get a chocolate or something like that, or ice cream? And I mean, it's great to kind of, have a treat every now and then, but when it starts becoming habitual and routine, and often that's because of an underlying source. So, for example, you were deprived of those kind of things in childhood, either because there was a lack of money, for example. So you never had those kind of luxuries that were normal in other households. So you never had the cakes and the sweets and the chips. It was only on a special occasion, like your birthday, for example, that you got this. And so there's the scarcity mindset. And now that you're in a position that actually you can have these things, you start actually almost like binge eating those things because you have this deprived mindset or the scarcity that you're never going to have it again, so let me have it now kind of thing.
And also, is it a matter of control? Sorry, Kelly, you want to add?
I was just to add on to that, I think it also comes back down to that learned behavior with food. So it's a learned behavior. It's not something that we're born with. We've learned that food is comforting. So, for example, if someone has a loss in the family or a trauma, your first response is to go and drop off meals for that person. What can I cook for you? What can I drop off? A bar of chocolate? What's going to make you happy? So again, it's that relationship with food that we've learned is comforting. Food is comforting. So that's where other people come in and you might not have gone and bought yourself a slab of chocolate, but someone else will give it to you.
We think you need this.
Because we think you need it.
We think you need it. And in terms of control in relationships as well, then, is it often where, and partners can do that. They want to derail you. They see you've done so well. And whatever their issues are, because now it's not only your issues, it's their issues as well. Or partners, or even if it's siblings, or even if it's, a cousin, whoever it is, there's always that person. There's somebody who, they can see you've lost a few and you're looking great and like, oh, come on, we go out and I'll just have it. You can exercise tomorrow. You can run it off on the treadmill tomorrow. Have dessert with me or share something with me, share a piece of cake. There is that matter of control, and some might be well-meaning, like I say, but there are others who actually want to sabotage. That's the word.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be because of their own inner insecurities or their inability to achieve what they aspire to, but they see that you're doing it. So underneath that, there's a sense of potentially jealousy, or that, you've been able to do it, but I haven't. And so you're comparing yourselves, this comparison, and it can become a control thing. And it's without realizing it, that you're trying to get this person to slack off or lighten up so that it gives you an excuse to continue your behavior that you're doing.
What a minefield. Such a minefield, this thing. I mean, okay. So let's talk solutions. We have all the stuff, whether it's coming from within, whether it's coming from outside, whatever it is that is causing the emotional eating, whether it's my emotions, somebody else's emotions that's making me eat, or whatever is going on there. Let's talk solutions. So, Kelly, in terms of now just realizing, we've realized that this is the problem. We've realized that, it's not just about we're not hungry. We're eating because we're stressed and there's something happening in our lives and inside ourselves. Where's the starting point? Can it be fixed, first of all? Can you fix emotional eating, or is it always a work in progress?
So it may always be a work in progress as long as you are managing your emotions. So I think from my point of view, the starting point is always identifying the triggers. What is the trigger? Is it boredom? Is it stress? Is it a medical condition like depression?
Yeah, some people are stuck in bad marriages, so they eat all the time. Okay.
So identifying the trigger is step number one, and then coming up with other alternatives. So for example, I normally tell my patients, come up with a list of things that make you happy, like going for a walk, phoning a friend. So you're giving them a solution to when they're in that moment of feeling overwhelmed emotion. So instead of going for the food, take a look at your list and say, okay, you know what, let me just rather go for a walk or have a cup of tea. So you give them coping strategies to try and deal with that moment that they're feeling overwhelmed with food.
So for example, if you want to have a snack when you shouldn't be having a snack, or it's a snack but you want to reach now for, you had a healthy meal, you had a salad, say, for lunch, and then you think, okay, I deserve to, I could have a biscuit or two with my tea. How do we talk ourselves past that point and say, rather have a handful of nuts?
So it's basically taking a step back in that moment and acknowledging the emotion. So if you take a step back and say, you know what, I'm actually not hungry. I might be stressed. I'm tired. So just acknowledging that emotion that you are feeling helps you then to not use food as the coping mechanism. Okay. So take a step back, acknowledge what you're feeling, and then take it from there. Some of the studies have also shown is just by delaying the instant gratification also helps us over time to break that hedonic pathway, which is our reward pathway in the brain.
How long does it take to delay? How long should I wait? 2 minutes, so 5, 10, half an hour?
So it's about a 10 to 20 minute delay. Over time, that breaks that reward pathway. So if you think about it like this, if you want the chocolate and you give it to yourself right now, releases dopamine, you feel happy, and that whole cycle continues. Yeah. Whereas if you take a step back, break for 10 to 20 minutes, go for a walk, even if you still come back and have that chocolate, over time, you're breaking that hedonic pathway, which is a learned pathway in the brain.
Hedonic pathway. See, yes. My learned pathway is like if I feel I'm watching something, I need to put something in my mouth. If I'm reading, I need to put something in my mouth. That's a hedonic pathway. Is that a learned behavior?
It's a learned behavior.
Okay. Or you feel you have to have something sweet after dinner. That's a learned behavior. You don't always have to have dessert.
No.
Okay, right.
And then mindful eating is also quite a nice topic to talk about in terms of it's a technique for coping with emotional eating. So often we have lost touch with food. We've lost touch with, we eat on the go, we're in the car, we're dropping kids at school, we're busy. So you've actually lost touch with what you're eating. Yeah. And that contributes to emotional eating. So the concepts of mindful eating is taking a step back and being present in that mealtime. So what does the meal smell like? What does it taste like? What are the textures like? So be present. Look at what you're eating and be aware of all the senses that come with it.
Make it a little ceremony for yourself.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what it is. It's an event.
So what that does is it gets you back in touch with your hunger and satiety cues. So you're now present in the mealtime. You're aware of when you're feeling full. You're aware of when you're feeling hungry. And that just helps you to not emotionally eat because now you're eating according to your physiological hunger.
And so much of this makes sense, but life takes over, right? So much of it, and it's easier to go down that path. You know, when you have the devil and the angel on each shoulder, it sounds like that. And Paula, I mean, from your side, in terms of working through the psychological aspects of this, who are the players involved in getting somebody back on the right path and the healthier path?
So first of all, taking accountability for self. It starts with you. Only you can change your situation, and there's got to be a willingness to want to change.
And I think we're
at.
more aware these days. We're more aware of ourselves. We're more self-aware. There's so much stuff out there to say to you that you can realize. We can't say, oh, you know what, I need a shrink. Or a lot of us actually know. We know. And it's the admission to oneself, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we know this, but are we willing to do something about it? Yes. And that's where you've got to tap into. And as Kelly said, you've got to unlearn the behavior and replace it with new behavior. So the first thing is understanding your triggers, and stress is a big one. In fact, number one in our lives at this, because of the busy lives that we live. And then putting some of those coping mechanisms in place. So sometimes you're not necessarily hungry, but you're thirsty.
Yes.
So drink a glass of water or something and then wait half an hour or so and see if you are still feeling hungry. And if you are, then have something to eat. Also, movement, so exercise, and you don't have to be a big gym bunny and those kind of things. Simply going for a walk and being outside and in touch with nature allows you to be grounded within yourself and in touch with yourself. And then support structures, if there are people in your lives that are contributing to your emotional eating, it's about putting down those boundaries.
They are your triggers.
Exactly. Yeah. Putting down strong boundaries and standing firm on your boundaries to help you achieve what you want to achieve. So pushing back and saying no and holding people accountable to respect your boundaries. And at the same time, seeking professional help if you feel that you can't do this on your own, and being aware of your emotions. We've become so numb to our emotions. We're either sad, mad, or glad. But there's so much more to life than this.
Yeah.
And really going in on that self-conscious awareness journey of, when am I feeling happy? When am I feeling sad? What's contributing to that? Why is that? What do I want to do about it? How do I want to express that? How do I want to feel about it? And being able to talk about it as opposed to eating about it.
Yeah. Okay. Eating about it. I like that. All right. So we know now that admitting to yourself, realizing that you have an emotional trigger that leads to emotional eating, and seeking help for that is key to sort of, no, I wouldn't say getting fixed, because like Kelly said, this is always a work in progress. So Kelly, let's talk about actual physical techniques that need to happen with the food you're seeing in front of you. And here I'm thinking we're going back to you kind of moving from being an emotional eater to becoming a mindful eater. Is not eating just because. It's eating because your body is actually hungry and telling you it's hungry. So, let's talk about practical things that we actually do to move from emotional eating to mindful eating.
So being a mindful eater is not something that comes naturally. It does take a little bit of practice, and over time you get to be more aware of your cues and your hunger cues. I think the most important thing is not eating just for the sake of eating. So not just having breakfast because it's breakfast time. So actually being consciously aware of when you feel those cues in your tummy's rumbling, you're feeling hungry, blood sugar's dropping, being aware of those physiological cues of hunger helps us to become a mindful eater. Another tip in practice that I often tell my patients is to chew your food slowly. So often we are on the go, we're in the car, kind of eating lunch. We've lost touch with actually sitting down and being present at a mealtime and chewing your food slowly. And all of those things will help you to become more of a mindful eater.
Do we need to develop that kind of gratitude for food? And we know that, there are certain rituals around food that maybe are there for a reason, where a lot of people say grace at the table. They appreciate the food. They give thanks for the food. They have that sort of revering of the food, if I were to put it, where it gives you a chance to smell it and look at it and see what you want, as opposed to just piling, dishing from the stove and sitting in front of the TV or whatever. So gratitude, food gratitude, if I were to call it that. I don't even think it's a real term. How important is that?
So it is quite important. It is a component of mindful eating. So just taking a step back and thinking, where did the food come from? Acknowledging where it came from, being thankful for where it came from. That is all part of being a mindful eater, instead of just devouring the food and not actually caring where it came from.
And a lot of people have that habit where you're taking something in case you get hungry, or we're told, take this. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I pack snacks for my kids and they're like, Mom, but I don't need so much. I'm like, but in case you're playing cricket today, but in case you get hungry later and the tuck shop is not open, that kind of thing. How damaging is that?
So I think a lot of people also have anxiety around feeling hungry. So some people are not comfortable with that feeling of hungry or emptiness in their tummy.
It mustn't even start.
Yes.
The hunger mustn't even start, yeah.
So I think it's also working through that and actually being content and being okay with being a little bit hungry. I think we're so quick to, the minute you feel that first hunger cue, you quickly go and eat something. It's actually okay to build up a bit of a hunger.
Okay. All right. So, Paula, how damaging is it? And I think you touched on this a little earlier. If we don't start to realize or don't realize that this is becoming emotional eating, this is a problem, what are the impacts, firstly, on our mind, our body, and our relationships with people around us? Because this is something that can ruin actual relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts impacting our own self-worth, our own self-esteem, our own self-confidence, especially the relationship that we have with our bodies and how we feel about our bodies. And then obviously that spills over into other areas of our lives. So in our relationship, we feel self-conscious with our partners, for example, and sometimes even, our children. And children can be cruel sometimes. They can say things without realizing they're saying something and it's hurtful.
Oh, yes. But Mom, why don't you look like the other moms at school?
Yeah, those kind of things. And so it can definitely impact our relationships around us. And that can lead to, long-term mental issues such as, depression, anxiety, the negative coping mechanisms that we've spoken about. And, I think this is where it's equipping people with tools and strategies, like Kelly's mentioned, around the food side, but also around how to manage your stress and how to recognize when you're stressed and what's contributing to the stress. Is it something personal? Is it something in the workplace? And then what do you do with that to manage your stress and life stresses? And that it's okay to have bad days or down days. We all have them. That doesn't mean that you're a failure. So also teaching people how to overcome setbacks. Those days where I had a bad day, I ate that piece of chocolate cake and I had this, okay, that was yesterday. Today is a new day, new start. How do you start afresh today and not get stuck in that yo-yo cycle that we spoke about earlier?
Yeah. And, Kelly, a lot of people might listen to this conversation and think, oh, you know what? I need to stop thinking about food so much. But it's very difficult. You're a mom and, I'm a mom and we all like kind of, we think about food from the time we wake up. It's about what to cook for the family, what to thaw, what to take out from the freezer. It's very difficult to do, which, and then you have those people who say, I live to eat, and others go, but I eat to live. Are those things? Do we need to start doing away? Paula's putting her hand up. Which one is it, Paula? You eat to live or live to eat?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that one out, because, I'm a runner. So yes. I'm still like, do I run to eat or do I eat to run? I'm not sure yet.
Are you making space or are you clearing out? Which one is it? So, all of those things and all of those attitudes, can I put it that way? Attitudes towards food, and some of it you can't help. But this eating to live or living to eat, and, which is right, which is wrong? How do we find that middle ground when it comes to this healthy relationship with food?
So I think we're never going to not think about food. Like you said, it's such a big part of our lives, socially, culturally, like you said, feeding your family. So food is always going to be there. And I think it comes down to, with emotional eating, taking a step back and realizing when it's an emotional eating versus eating for hunger. Yeah. So the eating is not the problem. It's the emotion behind it that's driving what choices you're making.
Yeah, so it's not the food that's the problem.
It's not the food.
and it's learning how to make healthier choices or better decisions, and that rewarding yourself. So treating yourself. So if Friday night is cheat night because it's the end of the week and it's pizza night, that's okay. It's okay to have fun and to let your hair down, everything. But as that's that cliche, everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation. And that is so true. And being kind to yourself. Hey.
And we also see it a lot in practice where people label certain foods as bad and certain foods as good. So I think we need to move away from that. And that's where a lot of the anxiety comes around it. Oh my gosh, I've had a chocolate, now I feel super guilty. So we need to stop labeling certain foods as bad and include them as part of a balanced lifestyle.
Yeah. So make space for them in some way, in some way in the week.
So everything in moderation. And with that mindset, you don't feel deprived. You've included your treats in moderation, and that helps you to heal your relationship with food.
And most importantly, heal yourself, because that's where this all begins. All right, ladies, thank you so much. Very enlightening. And I could talk for days about food. I love food. Like I say, I have a love affair with food. There's no problem. We don't have a bad relationship. But friends, as you can see, emotional eating is more serious than we realize. Most of us go through it at some point in our lives, some circumstance that makes us turn to food or develop an unhealthy relationship with it. It's important to recognize the signs, know why it's happening, and the right way to correct it, not put in strict rules as we think is often the answer. It's not just a matter of getting on a good eating plan. It involves your mind and your body. If you ignore it, it could so easily spiral out of control and become a lifelong problem. And that is why on Centropy here, we talk about nourishing yourself, nourishing your body, nourishing your mind, and nourishing your soul. Until the next time here on Centropy.